Good morning, everyone, and I want to welcome you and call to order our Middlesex County Council budget meeting for Tuesday, March the 9th. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none at this time, I am going to turn it over to Cindy to present to us the 2021 budget. Thanks very much, Cindy.
Thanks, Warden. Greg, can you put up the presentation? Okay, great. So through the Warden, thanks. And I get the pleasure of presenting the 2021 budget today. Next. The budget process today includes a budget presentation, and then Council will have an opportunity to review the individual department budgets, and department heads will respond directly to questions. Next. This year, the budget was prepared using the new Questica budget software. As discussed with the Budget Committee, next year the budget package will include budgets for 2020 and 2021, actuals for 2020, and preliminary actuals for 2021. This will provide additional information. And we have just a couple slides. This one's just of the county map. Next. And this one just shows a little bit of our demographics, our income, and our home ownership. Next. So the County of Middlesex operates a wide variety of programs and services available to the public, such as land ambulance, long-term care, 15 library branches, local roadways, social services, economic development, and planning services, as you can see from the organizational chart. Next. Next. This slide shows the definitions I included every year in our budget package. So we have the levy, we have the tax rate, which we'll be talking about later, real growth, and reassessment. The growth in 2021 is $577,050. Again, we'll talk about that in the budget summary. Next. COVID. So COVID-19 has had a large impact on the operations of the county and the community. We'll be talking a lot about COVID-19 as we go through the budget today. This impact and recovery continues into 2021. Next. So in 2020, the county put in measures early to mitigate the impacts of the budget. We weren't sure if we were going to get additional dollars from other levels of government, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit later. But the county incurred cost pressures and revenue losses as a result of COVID-19. Next. So COVID-19 funding. Funding announcements from upper levels of government for COVID-19 was approximately $8 million we've received. And it was in the form of Safe Restart from the Ministry of Long-Term Care, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Ministry of Education. And cost pressures and revenue losses include screening, pandemic pay, vaccinations, technology, PPE, homeless, and community paramedicine. Next. So funding in some situations had to be spent in 2020. Reconciliations were required and funds clawed back as required. So for example, land ambulance and long-term care, we got the pandemic pay. Funding such as Safe Restart funding will require reporting back to the provincial government, and funds not used in the year are to be put into a reserve account to support COVID-19 costs and pressures. Funding for Social Service Relief Fund, SSRF, has to be spent by March 2021. An additional funding may still be issued in 2021, and we already have received some for long-term care and land ambulance. And on March 4th, 2021, the county received an additional amount of $760,000. Next. So 2020 and 2021 funding. Two reports are due back to the province. One, the interim report in June 2021, and two, a report back in the spring of 2022. And Finance will be coming back with a complete COVID funding update at a future council meeting once we've gone through our year-end processing. Next. And I guess the one final thing I wanted to say about COVID-19 funding, the 2021 budget mostly does not include COVID-19 funding, as it is a one-time and temporary. That's why I need to come back to council and have a thorough discussion regarding their funding. So the budget process. Thanks to Greg Marles and Deb Fiddler for their assistance with the Questica implementation, the budget, and the presentation, including these great county pictures. Next. So the budget timeline. Today we are presenting the draft budget to council. The budget will get approved at the next March meeting. And we do tax policy in April. Next. So the budget committee. The budget committee was established by county council and is made up of the warden, Councillor Curtis Smith, Councillor Ina DeViet, and Councillor Brian Ropp. Thanks. Next. So our budget philosophy, it's been similar as in past years. It was to eliminate the non-essential budget increases, examine current expenditures, determine whether they remain relevant in 2021, examine expenditures that are not consistent with council policies, continue to fund PSAB process. Next. So this slide shows highlights of some of the strategic investments being proposed in 2021. These really move the county forward and support council's strategic plan. So on the left, you can see there's a number of transportation items. So the big one being the cycling strategy, also the work on the Glendon Drive roundabout. We also have the land ambulance of the 3 new 12-hour ambulances, additional county resources for the economic development strategic plan. We have the RFID in our library, the ITS strategic plan, and the building access control system replacements at the lodge. So you can see there's a wide variety of investments that we put in the budget for this year. Next. So just a little bit of history and context that I show each year. Again, on the assumptions, it's important because we don't have our final funding for land ambulance and long-term care. Prior decisions also have to be considered in this budget. So those include the council strategic plan, library service review and the strategic plan, economic development strategic plan, and the transportation 5-year county roads capital plan, 2021 to 2025. And just a reminder that impact, the government decided that they would continue to use the current reassessment. Sorry, I just got to move my pictures around to see my slide. And the last one on here is the OMPF. If you can go to the next slide. So this chart shows the steady decrease of our OMPF funding over a number of years. In the last 5 years, for example, we have realized a 47.8% decrease in funding. So this really does affect our levy. Next. So the budget committee recommendations. So the next few slides will show all of the budget committee recommendations, but the first one was administration. It was the removal of the procurement purchasing position in administration budget. The committee asked that we consider this position as part of the modernization discussion, which we'll be talking later today at the council meeting. Next. In economic development, the recommendation was to remove the SOMA membership. However, the budget committee also recommended that SOMA attend a future council meeting to discuss the benefits of being part of SOMA in the future. Next. The third one was around transportation. So in 2020, we did have a large winter maintenance surplus. So the decision was to use 50% of the winter maintenance 2020 surplus and apply it to the 2021 budget. And 50% of that winter maintenance will go into the reserve. This direction was a one-time only. Next. In the library, it was decided that $355,000 was going to be funded from the one-time modernization provincial funding. Again, you're going to see that report later today at the council meeting. In the library budget that was approved by the board, this amount was funded from the 2020 surplus. The budget committee also recommended that the remainder or the net amount of the 2020 library surplus be applied to the 2021 county budget. Again, this direction is a one-time direction. Next. And the last one was the tax rate stabilization. And the recommendation was to withdraw that $1.4 million from the reserve. I just would like to point out that past practice has been to apply the budget surplus to the tax rate stabilization. And I can tell you that the preliminary actual surplus is 1.6 million. And again, we're still in the middle of year end and doing our processing and also doing that COVID-19 funding processing. So I do expect that that surplus will be larger when I come back to you. Next. So now we're on to the budget slides. Next. So this is just really a snapshot of the net taxation requirement, and that is of the 45,975,942 that's required. And this means a 2021 tax rate increase of 1.7%. Again, this was the budget committee recommendations. They looked at a number of scenarios, and this is what they came up with. And this 1.7 is in relation to all the recommendations that we just talked about previously. And of course, this would be assuming that there's no change to our tax policy. What this means to our residential tax impact per 100,000 would be 6.65. If I looked at the per 150,000, it would be at $9.98. And I'll point out some of our neighbor tax increases. So the County of Bray, they approved a 2.11% increase. The County of Wellington, a 1.2% increase. And Lambton just recently, a 1.75% increase. Next. So 2021 budget drivers. So these are the main budget drivers that really impact the majority of our department budgets. So the first one is the insurance costs have been updated to reflect expenditure increases in the premiums. We are expecting our renewal in July of 2021. And I will note that this increase to premiums is being experienced across municipalities. The budget includes the union collective agreement impacts, including grid and benefit increases, the non-union annual increase of 1.7% and grid and benefit increases, the one-time salary adjustments for job evaluation, and inflationary increases. Next. Now, the top 6 budget drivers that make up the majority of the increase in 2021 include the transportation, which is our road projects, including the large cycling strategy, our transportation additional bridge capital of that 250,000, land ambulance, approximately 500,000, our social housing, where we get the invoice from the City of London is 364,000, economic development of those 2 staff positions, which really support the economic development strategic plan of about 100,000, and of course that reduction in OMPF funding. Next. We also need to consider what our future budget impacts are. So of course, with the social housing, we know we're going to see increases until 2023 based on the City of London multi-year budget. Transportation, the 5-year county roads capital plan of 2021 to 2025. Again, the cycling strategy is in there. And then we expect to see some provincial downloading from public health services, social services, childcare, and Ontario Works. Next. So this is the big budget recap, which just pretty well pulls everything together in one spot. It shows all of the departments, their total expenditures. So on the left-hand side, when I say total expenditures, that's the gross expenditures. On the very far right side is the net taxation requirement, and that's what impacts our levy. On the bottom part of this, you'll also see if we needed to use some money from reserves, which we talked about earlier. We also are, you can also see where I put in the surplus from the winter maintenance, the surplus from the library. You'll see a small piece of COVID. And then of course you see the growth that's there. And that's how you come up to that 1.7%. Next. So these are the gross expenditures. So the net budget is expenditures less the non-property tax revenues. So example, provincial funding. So this shows the provincial funding that we will receive. Go next. This is just another example where you can see the increases over a 2-year period. Again, this is gross expenditures. Next. This is where you see a big difference because this is the net taxation requirement by the department. So Chris doesn't like this slide because all of a sudden transportation, as you can see, is the largest piece of this pie. And you can see that the pie for land ambulance and the lodge and social service, for example, where we do receive other sources of revenue, such as provincial funding, these slices of the pie decrease in this slide. This is what our levy is based on. Next. Again, this is just another example that shows that. So when I talked about those large increases, this chart really shows. So I talked about transportation. I talked about social services with the housing. I showed land ambulance there, and you can see the increase. Next. And this chart just shows a summary of our capital. So it's a total of that 21 million, and we'll be going into a little bit more detail as I go forward around the capital for each department. Next. So next. So for each department, I will quickly outline an overview of the department, some 2020 highlights, and some of the departments will be more COVID in relation, 2021 budget highlights, and some capital highlights. So again, the first one here is administration. So the administration budget includes governance, which is county council, office of the CAO, county clerk's office, human resources, the treasury department, our legal department, facilities, and also community transportation has been put in the budget this year. Next. So some of the 2020 highlights in administration was again the launch of the community transportation program. The community safety and well-being strategy is underway with all of our local municipalities. Our human resources implemented a number of new policies, but one of them was working from home policy. The payroll review as part of the provincial modernization was completed. And again, we'll be talking about modernization later at County Council. Management support, Adelaide Metcalf, of course, the sale of the county properties, and the demonstrated leadership by the electronic meeting procedures for the Municipal Act council meetings, Planning Act, and the drainage hearings. Next. So this chart, and you're going to see this chart in each one of them. I really wanted to show you the total expenditures. Again, I want to remind you, those are gross. On the far right, you will see the net taxation requirement. And I also highlighted on the top of each of these slides what the percentage increase from year to year is. So administration is that 2.9% increase. And some of the highlights include, the revenue includes a 400,000. That was part of the use of proceeds allocation. Again, that presentation was at council in January of 2021. Council and warden travel and council dinners were reduced by 25% to reflect these virtual meetings in the first quarter of 2021. And the human resource department includes a 0.5 FTE of a health and safety position. However, I want to note previously that position was 100% in transportation. We've just moved it 50% in the admin and 50% in transportation. It also includes a position that will support land ambulance, and their land ambulance, we will have a recovery for that. And the last piece which I mentioned already is the community transportation has been included in this budget. Next. So the administration capital budget, we have that transfer to capital of $27,800, and that's just for our PSAB and our computers each year. The big one here is the $1 million, and again, it goes to the proceeds from the sale, and it's for a new facility development for the future. Next. So now we're on to the next department, which is planning and woodlots, a department overview. And I kind of put the department overview in here in case anybody is watching this and they want to understand a little bit about what the county does. So each one of these slides provides a very high summary of what the department overview is. So for planning, we have county planning, we have this local planning, we have mapping and GIS, woodlands, and our local planning. Next. Some of the highlights from 2020 was the completion of the county official plan background reports, including provincial change and population and housing forecasts. Development across the county and across all types of applications increased, and the provincial suspension of certain planning timelines, and as a result of COVID. Next. Planning, we see an increase of 3.1%. The budget maintains current staff and service levels. The budget includes $30,000 for the Clean Water Project, drawn from funds realized from Woodlots bylaw, and a special project funding. Next. Economic development. So the department mainly is research and information management, marketing and communications, business retention, and investment and traction. Next. Now there's a lot of budget highlights in this one from 2020. The department was very busy. COVID supports was that economic resiliency task force, also that hashtag Middlesex strong, the tourism development, economic development, and here we had the development of the 2021 to 2025 economic development strategic plan, and also some work in workforce development. So that includes job fairs, youth employment videos. Next. So this budget is increasing by 24.4%. And the highlights of this are the economic development and tourism budget is directly aligned with the objectives of the recently approved Middlesex County Strategic Plan, and of course the Economic Development Strategic Plan. This budget also includes those new staff positions, the Economic Development Officer, and the Tourism Marketing Coordinator. Next. So information technology, ITS. So ITS supports the County of Middlesex, but also supports 6 of the 8 local municipalities in the county. Next. So this is a department where they were very busy with responding to COVID-19 and very fast. So the pandemic caused a major shift in the way business was conducted across the county. The ITS department had to react extremely quickly to work from home requirements, to deploy equipment while maintaining the required cybersecurity controls. This shift to virtual council meetings, and also deployment and support of the lower tier municipalities as well. You can see from the number of tickets below, 815 tickets and 385 hours for COVID support. Next. So for the ITS budget, we actually seen a 3.4% decrease. And some of that you can see is in this recoveries and other revenue, where there was an increase to the land ambulance recoveries and the increased revenues from the local municipalities that this department supports. And there has been some increase in expenditures. So for disaster recovery and business continuity program, additional licenses, and we see a few decreases, such as the travel and office supplies and the data center hosting with the City of London. Next. So for capital, consistent with prior years, their capital budget is $150,000, and you can see a few of the items highlighted here. So hardware, licensing, the cybersecurity, ITS strategic plan, and of course the transfer to PSAP. Next. So the Social Services Department overview. It's made up of a number of areas. So the first one is Ontario Works and Discretionary Benefits. So this department provides temporary financial assistance, assists in becoming employed and achieving self-reliance. Income assistance includes allowances for basic needs and shelter, and also the employment supports. Children's Services includes a provision of the general operating grants to our licensed childcare operators, our fee subsidies to our families, one-time grants, special needs resourcing, capacity building, wage enhancement grants, and home child care enhancement grants. Next. Social housing and homelessness prevention. Social housing is the public housing stock within the county that is owned and delivered by London and Middlesex Community Housing as a corporate entity of the City of London. Homelessness prevention is the provincial chippy dollars, provides supports to residents who are homeless or at risk at homelessness. Next. We also have Homemaker and Nurses Services Program. So it's governed under the Nurses and Homemaker Services Act and regulations. And the Homemakers and Nurses Services Program provides services such as light housekeeping, laundry, shopping, and meal preparation to low-income individuals in the community who require assistance with household daily living. Next. So these are our 2020 highlights, and just a couple of them. All of our services were seamlessly shifted from person to online by email or phone supports, and currently we still are doing that. We also issued additional funds through our COVID-19 Ontario Works discretionary benefits in order to aid clients with PPE and other basic needs. And our Social Services Relief Fund, SSRF, we applied and we were successful in receiving additional funding. And this funding has to be spent by March 31st, 2021. Next. For our childcare, 6 of our licensed childcare centers opened their doors to support the needs of emergency childcare in December 2020 and January 2021. They were able to support over 77 school-aged children. We also seen some new licensed childcare spaces open. So we had Angels Daycare in Thorndale, Kamoka, and Arva, and also Kids Co Childcare in Kamoka. We also received some federal childcare Safe Restart funding that was issued directly to our childcare centers. Next. So our social services budget had a 5.7% increase. And as you can see, the majority of that increase was for the social housing. We also decreased our Ontario Works program costs. However, these are 100% funded. And we also see a decrease in provincial funding for Ontario Works. And this is based on our agreement with the City of London because of our county share of the total CMSM caseload. Next. So Transportation Department overview. So it's responsible for the maintenance, operation, and capital works of 1,600 lane kilometers of roads and over 250 bridges. It manages the community emergency management activities across the county. So definitely in 2020 and 2021, they've been busy with their COVID response. Next. So some of the 2020 highlights. So the road and bridge construction and maintenance was largely unaffected by COVID-19, as much of the work was considered essential and needed to continue to maintain our assets and protect the public. They also had additional expenditures for emergency management, and council approved the 5-year county roads capital plan, and the County Central Operations Center renovations are underway and should be completed in 2021. Next. So this budget increased by 14.6%. And some of the big items was the county road and bridge assumption study resulted in an overall increase in total center line kilometers of roads to the system to 850 kilometers. That's approximately a 3% increase. There was no increase to the funding of OCIF. However, we did receive additional federal gas tax funding. Material cost increases was about 1.5%, and the winter maintenance budget has finally increased to the point where the previously recommended 7% annual increases over the normal estimated cost increases are no longer required. So that's great news for us. And the per kilometer annual maintenance costs were $9,394. Next. So a lot of the funding for transportation is in this capital line. As you can see, the total capital is that 16.5 million that they're asking for 2021. And it's based on the roads, equipment, facilities, and bridge. Next. So the next couple slides just are highlighting of what the capital projects are. So the first one is that transfer to the capital reserve for the road projects. It increased by that 11 million to account for the increased amount of road infrastructure. And of course, it includes a Middlesex County cycling strategy. We also have that additional increase of the 250,000 we talked about previously for the bridge capital. We have the approximate 64.5 lane kilometers scheduled for the reconstruction or rehab in 2021. And we also have the County Central Operations Center renovations, which I already talked about, scheduled for completion this spring. Next. So we also have the detailed design and preliminary construction, and this is about the roundabout. We also have some major bridge projects. We have new traffic signals anticipated in Park Hill. We have the transfer to the equipment capital and the transfer to the facilities capital as per the asset management policies. Next. So Strathmere Lodge. So Strathmere Lodge is a 160-bed long-term care home, and it mainly supports our frail elderly. However, it can also support other individuals as well as listed. Next. So again, a couple of 2020 highlights. Early COVID vaccination for residents, the virtual care. So it's this new technology to minimize external resident appointments. And this is always nice to see, the acts of generosity. So staff meals sponsored by family members and local restaurants. And they also received a number of positive feedback about their efforts to keep residents safe during a very challenging time. Next. So in this budget, we see a 1% increase, or it's approximately 27,000. The long-term care sector is very labor intensive. So the budget really is made up of 82% is the wages and benefit costs. Other expenses have increased by about 2.4%, which is really the cost of supplies. Next. So there's a number of capital items, but the largest one is that access to the building controls of that 100,000. Otherwise, they've got adjustable dining tables, extra low beds. You also see lighting retrofit. We have some resident home area floor, and we have some fencing. Next. And we've talked about this already. Next. So one of our larger departments is the Middlesex London Paramedic Services Land Ambulance. So it's the direct provider of paramedic services for the County of Middlesex and the City of London. It also has 3 outward-facing edges, which is the 9/11 response operations, community paramedicine, which we've been hearing a lot about lately, and community education on the defibrillator program. Next. Some of the 2020 highlights: over 330 full-time and part-time staff. They've had over 90,000 calls for service, 28 units during the peak time, and 17 units on the lowest call volume. And of course, the specialized paramedic bus that's supporting the COVID-19 operations. And you've probably seen that out and about in the community, including in the County of Middlesex. Next. So their budget is a 13.6% increase. Again, on the far left, you see what the gross expenditures are. In the far right, you see the net taxation requirement. That's for the County of Middlesex. Included in this budget is the addition of 3 new 12-hour ambulances to address call demand. It says in London, but when you address call demand in London, you really are supporting the County of Middlesex as well. Reflects additional costs for payroll and employee employee benefits to support the proposed staffing increase. The increases to vehicle operations, investments in field training and paramedic education. And we've talked about this previously, but they've also faced an increase in the insurance program. Next. Some of their 2020 operating budget highlights: additional training costs, increase in medical equipment, increased costs to support the expanding fleet, increased costs for rent and operational support expenditures, the peer support team training, and of course, and very important, is additional resources for the paramedic mental health. Next. So capital, some of their key capital investments is the purchase replacement of the emergency vehicles, and of course, which is consistent with all the other departments, is the replacement of the computer hardware as per life cycle renewal timeline. Next. So the Middlesex County Library. So the Middlesex County Library is made up of 15 branches, and they provide a variety of information, research, and recreational programs and services. As you can see, there's a number of things that the library does, including the Early On Child and Family Program. Next. So some 2020 highlights. These ones I focused on the COVID-19 because it really did have a large impact on the county library. So for their facilities, they had limited in-person access by the public, physical distancing of staff, enhanced cleaning requirements. So for the collections, they were able to do curbside pickup. For programmings, they really transitioned very quickly to virtual programming, connecting with people at home, looking at alternate ways to deliver programming, including outdoor, and services, adopting existing services to a low contact, no contact model. And they really focused on serving vulnerable populations during this very difficult time. Next. So a couple other highlights other than COVID-19. They were able to update the 2021 to 2023 Library Strategic Plan. And of course, was the new dedicated Early On Child and Family Center space in Ilderton, which we're hoping to celebrate in 2021. And of course, they had the new Community Navigator position and services, which really has been supporting our homeless. And I have to say the timing on that position was good given COVID and some of the pressures individuals were seeing during this time. Next. So the county library seeing a decrease of the 4.9%. So this decrease really has to do with adjusted staff projections related to the anticipated service levels, again associated with COVID-19. And the 2020 surplus, again, was primarily related to the staffing budget and decisions that had to be made. And again, it came to that mitigation strategy that the county put in place early. They also have some increases for the pandemic-related expenses, cleaning supplies, PPE. I just will point out that the COVID funding that we received from other levels of government is able to offset these costs. And of course, this budget will support implementing new approaches to services and programs, experimenting with new technology to improve service experience, and continued development of virtual programs and services. Next. So they have a number of capital items that are here for a total of a little over 700,000. Some of the big ones are that RFID project of 250,000. We also have the technology replacement reserve of 150,000. And we have some other ones like the Wi-Fi hotspots and the book dispensing machine at 65,000. And as I indicated before, 355,000 of these items we're putting forward and using one-time provincial modernization funding. So that's the Wi-Fi hotspots, the book dispensing machine, and also that RFID project, because they really will move the county forward and the library system forward. Next. So we have one third-party budget that I've included here, which is the Middlesex London Health Unit. Lots of discussion around how much was to be included in our budget, but I can tell you this is the right amount. So you can see the 2020 amount and the 2021 amount, and we have a change of 5,853. I do want to point out in 2020, we did receive a little bit money back, so that amount was a little bit lower actually in 2021. We were lucky to have mitigation funding from the Ministry of Health to offset the municipal increases for 2020 and 2021. However, as I pointed out before, this is where we're going to see some increases in 2022. Next. So lastly is our reserves and our reserve funds. So why do we need these? Well, they cover liabilities and emergencies. They ensure that liquidity, allow us to pay bills. They're effective asset management. They also allow for flexibility to take advantage of opportunities. So that could be in order to sometimes get provincial or federal money. If we have funding available, we can apply for that. Next. So you can see we have a pretty healthy set of reserves and reserve funds. So you can see the total, the actuals for 2019 at the 37.5 million, and it goes up in 2021 to that 59.9, almost $60 million. Next. And our last one is the Tax Rate Stabilization Fund. And we've talked about that earlier when we talked about the getting our tax rate to the 1.7%, and we use the money from Tax Rate Stabilization. You can see the amount in 2019 was that 3 million. It's gone up to the 2021 projected of the 8.5 million. And I just want to remind that both in the reserve funds and the tax rate stabilization, we use money from the use of proceeds report. And again, that was presented to council in January 19, 2021. Next. So that takes me to the end of my budget presentation. I think I went through that pretty fast, but tried to give a very good overview of all the departments and what was included in some of the budget and the highlights. I want to thank all department heads, finance staff, information technology, and the budget committee. Again, this was a new budget using Questica. It's only going to get better from here. We have lots of really good data now in the system. We also purchased the budget book. So I say, wait to see what we can deliver next year. Very excited about that. And now I'm going to turn it over to the warden because she's going to go through the individual departments, and the department heads will respond to the questions from county councillors.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Cindy. And I think that that was an excellent presentation. Yes, it's a lot of information to go through, and it seems like a lot in a short period of time, but I think you hit all the highlights. I think that it will generate lots of discussion going forward. And I do want to thank you. I want to thank the department heads. I want to, you know, as in your thank you slide, all the background work that has gone into putting this all together. It's not a one-person show to make sure that it's all the information is there. So we're certainly grateful for everybody that had a hand in putting it together. Okay, so with that, you know, as I say, Cindy has highlighted all the departments. She's shared with you what the recommendations were coming out of the budget committee. And so I guess to start with, I will just go through each department, and any questions that come from that particular budget can be addressed, and then we'll see perhaps some general discussion that comes from there. So we'll start with administration. Any questions on the administration budget? Comments? I don't see any hands. Just pulling that up. Nothing from administration. Okay, so we'll move on to planning and woodlots. Any discussion from the planning budget? economic development. Questions or comments on economic development? This one, of course, I think has seen most significant change, but as I think Cindy did a good job of tying it back to the strategic plan. Councillor Vanderhagen.
I just want to mention that I attended almost every one of the budget meetings, so that's why I'm not asking any questions, because usually I ask a lot of questions, but just so you know, I've already asked my questions.
Thanks for that, Joanne. Councillor Smith.
Just a comment. I think with this department, we had a really good discussion about it at the committee level. A lot of discussion as to what we should move forward with, and I'm quite pleased with the recommendation to go forward with all of the recommendations that were in the strategic plan for economic development. So I just wanted to say that that's one that we dwelled on quite a bit to know what direction we should go in. But I'm quite happy to see that that we're not removing anything, and I'm sure CARE is also very excited moving forward as well with all the additional staff and all the plans moving forward. So I just want to make sure that everyone realizes how much time we spend on that economic development budget.
Yes, I would echo that those comments from Councillor Smith. I think it's important to note that even though in the budget there's 2 new staff positions, one is already an existing position that we've been able to fund through grant money. So we've already had that staffer on staff for the past year, Kara, and so he's already been doing work, but we would have to take over that salary.
Yes, through you, Warden, we have had that staff position in place, thankfully with the addition of provincial and federal grants for over 1.5 years at this point.
Okay, any other questions or discussion on economic development? Okay, information technology services, ITS. This is Chris's first budget. We should, somebody should put him on the hot seat.
Ask him if he had to grow that beard to become in charge of IT. That's the toughest question he can be asked.
I had a big beard to fill. I'm working on it. So
it's coming in, though. It's coming in.
You're getting there.
Yeah.
Part of the job description. Okay, social services. Anything that staff wanted to speak about with this one, or council wanted to speak about on this one? Okay, transportation. Councillor DeVee. Oh, you're muted, Ina.
There, got it this time. Sorry about that. Thank you, through you, Warden. It's more of a comment to along the lines as Councillor Smith commented in the previous question. This was one of those budget items that kind of looks really big, but that's that road and cycle piece. And our discussion here was equally thorough, I think, with respect to that cycling piece. And I just want to make sure that everybody on council is aware that the cycling piece has been a strategic priority for quite some time, and the implementation that our head of PWE, so Chris has thought long and hard about this, and we have actually a very good system in place to make sure that we're maximizing the dollars that we get, the bang for the buck, if you will, from this line item. So every time that a piece of county road is scheduled on the capital asset management plan for reconstruction or refurbishment, that kind of thing, once the equipment is there, that is when the cycling pieces are added to that. So there is no redundancy in terms of making another tender and getting people out to certain sites and sort of what I call the do and redo kind of approach. So it did look like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but it's an effective use of that funding. And I don't know about everybody here, but I know in the committee meeting, Increasingly, we get lots of questions from residents, probably as a function of COVID and its impact in terms of how people want to get outside and do things. There is increasing interest in getting out, doing cycling, and it's going to take a long time to get all of this done anyways. We need to get started on it, and we thought there is a sense of urgency to this. So that's just a bit of background that we covered in the meetings, and I think it was pretty well, it was a unanimous decision to say, yeah, we do need to get going on this. So that's just a comment. It's not a real question. Thank you, Warden.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor DeVitt. Councillor Warwick.
And just to support Mayor DeVitt's or Councillor DeVitt's comments, I was watching the 6 o'clock news last night, and Canadian Tire could not get their bikes put together fast enough, and they were sold out last year. So I think it's really the trend that we're looking at, and it's really nice to see Middlesex County be progressive and jump on that. So I think it's a great thing that you've gone through with this discussion.
Thank you for those comments, and not going to beleaguer it, but it was a very good discussion when it came to cycling, and I think we all agreed that the document had been there, the guiding principles have been there for some time, and at some point, you know, we needed to move on it, and this was a very good opportunity to start investment in that program. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Rock.
Thank you, Warden. On that same vein, we finally are up to the $4.5 million going into the reserve and the bridges that I think, Chris, you first identified that maybe 4 years ago. And we slowly got up to it, and we needed to do that. So I think that was an important one. And again, good discussion. All of our discussions with the committee were great, especially as we got going, getting used to the Zoom format. I thought it really went well. So just comments to that.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, before I move on, is there anything that you wanted to highlight at all or reinforce?
Thank you, Madam Warden. I just think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that this is a dedication of not just this budget committee, but previous budget committees and councils, that Middlesex County has been a strong supporter of sound infrastructure throughout our area. And, you know, I always think it's a good opportunity to remember that, as Councillor Robb said, it's taken many years for us to get to this level of funding for our bridge infrastructure. Council's always been a great supporter of the funding of our road infrastructure. I think people will tell you that the condition of our roads in Middlesex County are very good, and it helps us with regards to reducing our overall maintenance costs. And, you know, it's somewhat unfortunate that we see a number that was proposed in this budget for cycling, but it's just the cost of infrastructure construction. It's very expensive to build new infrastructure. We have to be mindful that that infrastructure has to be maintained in the future. And it's almost impossible to piecemeal it in small little bits and pieces. So, and again, as Councillor DeVitt mentioned, this is a practice that we've done before, where we're trying to be mindful that when we have an opportunity to build this cycling infrastructure as part of our regular road construction, we take that opportunity to do so. So this year and thanks to Council for making the recommendation to move forward with that infrastructure. And it's an exciting time, new time for us from the roadside. So really looking forward to getting moving on the cycling strategy.
Thanks. Okay, moving on to Strathmere Lodge. Any comments or questions for Brent? Okay. Brent, is there anything, and I guess I should have asked Dirk and Chris and Cindy, maybe I'll circle back, but Brent, is there anything that you wanted to specifically highlight? No. Okay. Maybe before I move on, Dirk, was there anything that you wanted to speak to in your budget at all?
No, nothing to add, Madam Warden.
Okay, thank you. And Cindy for social services? Chris for ITS? Think of something.
Nothing here, Madam Warden. Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on to Middlesex London Emergency Medical Services, EMS. Questions or comments on this one? Councillor Rock.
Thank you, Warden. Neil, if I can, for all of council here, we talked a little bit about this, is about the implementation of those 3 new 12-hour units. When are they coming forward? I know we talked about it at the committee, but council hasn't heard that.
Through you, Madam Warden, to Councillor Robb. Thank you so much for the questions. So once the budget is approved, we will start implementing those through temporary staffing, then post the positions. But again, they will be put on the road as quickly as possible.
Any other comments, questions? Is there anything that you wanted to add or highlight at all, Neil?
Just my appreciation for myself and my team for council's ongoing support, especially during COVID. It really does mean a lot, and we thank council for that. Thank you.
Moving on to the library. Anything that needs to be pulled on that one? Councillor Smith.
Just another comment from the committee side of things. So as the committee knows, I was very excited to see the RFID tags, and the warden's laughing because I was very excited. And I shared my story of how when Morgan and I were out in Whistler on when I was warden to the MISA BC conference, and I stopped by the one library there in Whistler, and I saw this new program with the RFID tags, and people just pick up the books, and then they can just go to this this station where they just pop their books down, and then they can just walk out with it, just checking them out. And it just seemed like a great idea. I came back, I talked to Lindsay about it, a few years later, here it is on our budget, and I'm very excited to see that. And there's so much more than you can, I really simplified it saying that, but with inventory and everything else, it's a really good system, and it's a large dollar amount, but I think in the long run, it's going to be a very good system with us. And I'm looking forward to seeing that roll out. So that's just, it's just a comment and my excitement. I'm so excited I can't even get my words together.
And certainly Councillor Smith and sharing his story about being out in Whistler, I think made us all excited about what that can mean for the county and improving accessibility to the library system. Councillor DeVete.
Just a quick additional comment with respect to how the funding of this. I think this is a perfect example of how modernization monies can be and should be used. So it's going to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of library staff and remove things that are kind of mundane, and they can just engage with the public on really service delivery as opposed to administrative kinds of tasks. So this is something I think we applaud and we want to continue to see more of. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions? Lindsay, is there anything that you wanted to highlight?
I'd just like to thank you, Madam Warden, and Council for their continued support of our projects on behalf of the Library Board. And yes, I share your excitement with the RFID project. And I was on a call last week with a number of library directors and CEOs from the region, and about 50% of them have either completed RFID work last year or have that planned this year, and some are tapping into municipal modernization funds. So it's perfect timing to ensure that our service level keeps increasing and we keep up with our neighbors and improve the service for our residents. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, any comments or questions on the third-party budget that we have to fund through the Middlesex London Health Unit? I guess I might just have one, and I don't know, Cindy, I'm not sure we have the answer, but certainly in the discussions that we've had surrounding the health unit's budget, there is concern that if not next year, certainly the year after, there could be significant increases to what we have to pay. And I guess the thought is, how are we preparing for that? Is there a way for us to prepare for that?
Through the warden. I guess once we understand what the costs are actually going to be, I will come back to County Council with the report. I did talk to the health unit last week, so they don't have any new information in regards to if this funding increase is going to happen or not. As we know, the mitigation funding was really around COVID. So it was for 2020 and 2021. So we are expecting the increases to come in 2022. So all I can say is at this time, I'll come back to County Council when I know a little bit more, and we'll plan on how we're going to address those increases and what they look like. And I guess we would work with the City of London because they're also going to be seeing those same increases. And I think Mr. Rayburn's already talked to the treasurer over at the City of London about these increases.
Councillor Elliott, is your hand up? Or
Sure. I'll just say that I did raise that concern at the Middlesex London Board of Health meeting when the budget was presented to the board. The province is covering the increases this year. There's just a small increase that they aren't covering, but a large portion of the increase for 2021 is being covered through the province. So I did raise that concern that moving forward into 2022, that those increases will come to the city and the county, and the health unit is aware of that, and the Board of Health is as well.
I know in the past, we've always had a presentation with Dr. Mackey. Not sure about how the roles have changed, whether he would be the one, but certainly I think as the year goes on, it would be great to have the health unit come in some capacity to present to County Council as they've always done. So maybe we can look to arrange that, obviously, as the year goes on. Okay, any other questions on the outstanding, either the tax rate stabilization reserve or our OMPF funding, and then our reserved and our reserve fund balances? Councillor DeVete.
This is probably because I had to ask the question. I'm just wondering, maybe we could have Cindy just comment on, there was a great big change to growth and reassessment. It was, I think, kind of an unexpected, well, there's COVID related reasons and so on and so forth, but if people are comparing year over year, they might look at that number and go, what's going on here? It's just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Heina, Cindy?
Yep, through the warden to Councillor DeVete. I guess you're asking about that growth, which was just a little over 500,000. And you're correct, in the past we have seen higher growth amounts. I can tell you that I'm actually working with the group that works on our tax policy, and I've asked them to explore a little bit more what happened with our growth in 2020. We also know there's a lag in growth. So in terms of the growth for 2021, was brought probably back into 2019, maybe a little bit into 2020. So I expect that we're going to see significant growth as we're going forward. We also had that delay from impact with the reassessment. So I think that could have an impact on our growth as well. And then there's also the appeals that were being done, and that also had an impact on the growth numbers that we've seen. So there's a number of factors that contribute to that. But I definitely can come back to County Council maybe during our tax policy time and be able to talk a little bit about that, and maybe some suggestions that we have to look at that amount and how we can see some improvements as we go forward.
Thanks. Bill.
Just on that, this is an abnormally low year, as Cindy pointed out, in terms of our growth numbers, the analysis, but it's not an unusually low year in terms of growth. In fact, it's the opposite. You know what we're seeing on the road, on the streets, and so in equally thinking about this low growth number, we also have to think about next year with potentially massive catch up as well in terms of that growth number, because I really think that the anecdotal evidence we're receiving about where our assessment growth is coming, even just the subdivision applications, you're going to see a fairly significant, it's pretty easy to predict. You're going to see a pretty significant increase in growth that should blow the doors off things we've seen in the past. And that, as you know, I know that was part of our thinking at the committee about using some of the tax rate stabilization now, because that growth should be able to put a lot of that back next year whenever we see this change in assessment. So it is a bit of an anomaly, I think, as Cindy pointed out, but you're going to have a bigger anomaly, I think, next year in the other way. And those swings in assessment are not good for anyone. They're not good for municipalities in terms of planning and keeping things equal, but that's the great part about the tax rate stabilization fund, is that it allows us to level off those ups and downs that we might see in terms of real growth in the community.
Okay. All right. Any other further questions or comments on what's been presented to you? Okay, seeing none, I guess I'll say that there is a motion that could be in front of you, and that would be that the 2021 estimates be approved and that the necessary bylaws be presented to Middlesex County Council at March 23rd, the 23rd, 2021 meeting. So if there isn't any further discussions or comments or questions, then I would look to make a motion. Councillor Smith and Councillor Richards.
I was going to make a comment.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay. Sorry, Curtis. No,
I said the same thing last year, and I'll say it again this year. And thank you to Council for re-electing Warden Kathy Burkhart-Justin as the warden, so that I can sit back on the budget committee for another year. This is a committee that is it's great because you get to see the overall of what we're doing in the year. And I know Councillor Vanderheyden always joins in. And especially with this year being on Zoom, it was more opportunity for members of council to either join in live during the meeting or watch the meeting afterwards on YouTube. And I know that Councillor Warwick and also Councillor Elliott also joined in as well. And I'm sure other members of council watched it later on. But this is, this is the committee, and these are the discussions that really kind of shape what the year is going forward and beyond. Those discussions that we had with the cycling strategy and what we're doing in economic development, those are very big and large discussions, and I'm glad that we had them. And I'm happy that I was able to be a part of it again as a committee member, thanks to holding on to that title of past warden for another year. So just wanted to say that that comment again, and maybe, you never know, maybe I'll say it again next year.
Thanks for that, Councillor Smith. Are you happy? So are you still happy to move that? Okay, so moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Councillor Richards. Any comment on that motion? All opposed? And that's carried. So I won't repeat what Councillor Smith said, but he's absolutely right. I hope that you did take the time to watch the committee recordings back, because you certainly learn a lot more about the operations, about the line items, and get a clearer understanding about the work that the county does. Certainly I've gained a new appreciation for that in the last 2 years. And as Councillor Smith said, the conversations really are good and go in great depth. And as Councillor Ropp mentioned, they did get better, I think, as the 3 or 4 days went on, as we became more comfortable and at ease with the virtual format. So I was very happy with the discussions, and obviously very pleased with what the committee had brought to council. So with that, if there aren't any other further comments or questions to me made, then I would ask for a motion to adjourn at 10 minutes after 11 a.m. And then we would see everybody this afternoon, Councillor Warwick and Councillor Mayhew. All opposed? And that's carried.